Welcome to the Waking Puck. Have you ever heard a pastor or church member say something like this? This isn't your grandma's church. As if that's something to brag about. Well, I got to thinking. I'm heavily tattooed, my ears are gauged, I love punk rock, subculture fashion, metal, oi, Jesus, the Bible, theology and its application, hermeneutics and people, and I am your grandma's preacher in your grandma's church. I have a PhD. I've pastored churches, I've been a hospice chaplain, I've worked in the fields of child abuse and neglect, and as a probation and parole officer. I love the underdogs and misfits in life, and I love to encourage people. I hope to offer you something that will inspire and educate and encourage, or to get you to think about something differently. Stick around. If you like what you're hearing, give me a like, consider subscribing, commenting, and sharing with others. Thanks so much for joining. God bless. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I appreciate you being here. I want to share a story today about somebody who profoundly changed my life. And I had been fairly new to this church. We moved here a little over 20 years ago, and we had been in the community maybe 2 weeks. And this was the second church I had pastored. It was around 2004. And we had been there about 2 weeks. And at the end of a Sunday evening service, we had this lady that came to my wife and I afterwards and said, "Hey, can I talk to you for a few minutes?" And we said, "Of course, yeah, we'll make some time for you." And she waited a few minutes for everybody to kind of, leave the building. And she wanted to share something. She looked like she was bothered a little bit. And I was a little nervous because I wasn't sure what to expect or how the conversation was going to unfold. And this was my only source of income. This is how I provided for my family. I had 3 children. I had a wife. We had just moved here. We had no friends, no family, no other means of support. This was it. We had to make it work. And so she begins to share after everybody left. She tells us who she is. She describes part of her life and tells a little bit of her history, how she had been married. She's got some kids. And she was a member of a church in another town where she had built some friendships and relationships with people that she loved and felt very comfortable with. She felt supported by them. And one day, in confidence, because she felt so comfortable with them, she decided she was going to let them in on a part of her life that she had kept secret. So she looked at her friends one day and said to them, "I'm gay." And her friends responded to her by saying, "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable someplace else." The reality is she was very comfortable with them. She was comfortable there. They were her friends. At least that's what she thought. She loved them. She thought they loved her. Now they want her to leave. She was comfortable. They were more comfortable with her someplace else because she challenged their worldview. They were taught to alienate and reject and judge and condemn people just like her. And so at this point in the conversation, she's literally doubled over and she's sobbing uncontrollably, tears and snot flowing out of her nose. And she looks up at one point in the conversation and she tells me, she says, "I've got no control over my attractions. I'm just not attracted to men. I am irresistibly attracted to women." And I thought, I'm processing this in my mind and I'm thinking, well, so am I. I can't recall a single time ever in my life where I've been able to control who I'm physically attracted to. And I thought, well, we have something in common there. We're both attracted to women and we have zero control over that. And then she shared her struggle with lust. And I thought to myself, wow, I lust too. In fact, every single person I've ever met struggles with lust. They're just not honest about it. It is part of our desire, right? We're wired for sexual activity. And so I thought, okay, so we've got some things in common here. And in my mind, I'm trying to build this sense of commonality to see a way in which I can maybe relieve some of her grief and her suffering and express some love to her. And at some point, she raises her head up and she looks at me and she says, "I'd like to come here. Will you be my pastor? Can I come here?" And I was so moved by her vulnerability and her courage. I can't imagine the amount of courage that she had to summon just to be able to open up to us, a Southern Baptist pastor, now pastoring a non-denominational church, but I was an ordained Southern Baptist pastor, right? I couldn't imagine the courage that she had to muster at that point just to risk being humiliated and rejected and alienated and pushed out of a community one more time just because she wanted a place where she could feel loved. She wanted somebody to teach her about this Jesus that she met and fell madly in love with. Now, I got to tell you, when she asked me if I would be her pastor, initially in my mind, I'm freaking out. Like, I was an ordained Southern Baptist pastor. I knew all the clobber passages, right? The 6 or 7 verses that everybody lifts from their context like Lego blocks and builds entire systems of thought on how to treat people just like her. Right? And it's irresponsible because a word has a meaning within its context. And that word appears in a verse that has a much larger context, and that has a larger historical and a literary and a geopolitical and social and religious context. And the context determines the meaning of a passage. And it would do us all well. It would do the world a great deal of service if we studied the context before we decided what a particular verse of scripture removed from the context means and then used as a weapon to beat up on vulnerable people just like my new friend. And so in that moment, I looked at her and I said, yes, you can come here. Yes, I'll be your pastor. And if you were ever mistreated by anybody in this church, I want you to come and tell me, and I'm going to deal with it. I wish I could tell you we always got along. I made her so angry one time. She simply wanted me to call her son and tell her son about Jesus. And she gave me his phone number. She gave me his email address. She really wanted her son to know Jesus. And she thought, I'm going to sick the pastor on him. And so I thought, okay, I'll give him a call. And so I tried calling him a few times, left some voice messages. I sent emails. I never got a reply, never a return phone call. And I thought, you know what? The guy's just not interested, and that's okay. I'm going to let it go. I'm not going to hound the guy. This is awkward. I hated when church members would sick the pastor on people. It was just awkward, and it was weird. It never did sit right with me, so I just let it go. Well, she called me up in a blind rage one day. She had this raging bonfire going in her front yard where she had been burning trash and burning old furniture, and she called me up to tell me about this bonfire in her front yard and tell me that she had been throwing items into the fire pretending it was me. And so I listened to her vent for a little while, and I explained to her, look, I didn't blow you off. I really did try. I tried on these occasions, and I showed her that, I made some reasonable good faith efforts here to just help you out with your request, and I wasn't successful, okay? Your son evidently is just not interested right now, and that has to be okay with all of us, all right? And so we let it go. We parted that conversation as friends, told each other we love you, and we saw each other again on Sunday as if nothing had ever happened. There were other times she would sneak out of the service, because she would feel overwhelmed at times. She had a lot of anxiety. She also struggled to breathe at times. She had emphysema and she was a heavy smoker. Well, she'd sneak out of the service at times because she couldn't make it a whole hour without a cigarette. She was anxious. So she would go into the bathroom and she'd smoke a cigarette. And I'd be up there teaching, or we'd be singing, and all of a sudden we could smell cigarette smoke. And I look and I'd say, there she goes. And so I'd have to pull her aside after service, and I'd say, hey, look, I don't care if you smoke, but you got to do it outside. We got ashtrays for you. Can you please just go outside and smoke there? And she's like, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And so she didn't do it again. Other times I would just be so moved by her love. I would watch her in service sometimes, and she would be in the middle of the aisle on her knees with her hands raised to heaven, singing with her whole heart to Jesus, tears streaming down her face. And then I'd look over at everybody else whom you'd think would have been moved by that same grace and love, and they were just deadpan faces, like they'd been baptized in pickle juice or something. But not her. She had touched grace. And I couldn't help but think, man, if we could all touch grace the way she has, it would change this whole community. A little while later on down the road, she needed to move away to be closer to family. Her health was deteriorating, and she relocated. On a Wednesday night, we had our parting goodbyes. We had prayer together. We communicated our love for one another, and we parted. And she left. I didn't have a phone number, an address, an email, or anything where I can stay in touch. She didn't stay in touch with us either. She just moved on with her life, and that was okay. I got an email one day from a hospice chaplain who asked me if I would go see her. He said, look, I've been seeing her. I've been spending time with her. She said you were her pastor. She'd like to know if you would come and serve her communion one more time. She's not going to be here much longer. And I said, of course. He gave me the address, and I had gone to the house, and when I walked in, I was not prepared to see her in the condition she was in. I had not yet been a hospice chaplain. I later became one, and that was a transformative experience in and of itself, but I wasn't prepared that day. She was emaciated. She could hardly speak above a whisper. She was laying in a bed, and I made my way over to her, and she grabbed my hand, and she looked at me, and she said, Mike, you're the only pastor I've ever had, and you never bullshit me about anything. I just want to know if we can have communion together one more time. I said, yes, that's why I'm here. We had communion together. We prayed. We told some stories, some old stories, some memories we had together. We said our goodbyes. A short while later, I had the privilege of officiating her memorial service with her family members and a few close friends. I tell you this story because one night I met a woman who lived differently than I did, who loved differently than I did. One night I met a woman whom I was taught to reject and judge and condemn and alienate and consign to hell based on 6 verses out of a very large book that were removed from their context, which determines the meaning of the passage. I was taught to reject people like her, but had I not met her, had she not summoned the courage and risked being humiliated and rejected one more time, my life would have never been impacted the way it has been since meeting her. She opened my heart to a level of grace and compassion that I had never experienced prior to meeting her. Not one time in our entire friendship did she ever ask me to betray my own conscience, to violate my own convictions about something. She never asked me to endorse anything. All she ever wanted was to know if I would love her and if I would teach her about Jesus and whether or not she could be part of our community. You will never meet a person in this world whom God does not love. Now, there are some people that I admit are hard for us to love at times, but you'll never look into the eyes of another human being that God does not love. When you see somebody who lives differently, who loves differently, who believes a little differently than you do, your first task is to recognize their humanity. At the end of the day, they have the same basic interests and needs that you and I have. They just want to be loved. And they're in need of grace too. Not judgment, not condemnation. That's not my responsibility. I cannot be trusted with power. The church has proven over 2,000 years they cannot be trusted with power. Our responsibility is to love people and to encounter them as someone who can spring us from the prison of ourselves, as Barbara Brown Taylor writes in her book, Altar in the World. I hope the story has been a source of inspiration and encouragement for you today to keep your heart open to another person's humanity and to keep your heart open to grace and the possibilities that come from a life that is steeped in hope. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to sharing with you next time. If this has been inspiring to you, if you have been helped and are encouraged, please like, subscribe, follow, share. Share it with a friend. Make a comment. I understand there'll be people that'll disagree with me. That's okay. You're entitled to your view. I'm not going to argue with you about it. My life has changed because of her, and I wouldn't change one single solitary moment. Thanks again. Have a great evening. Talk to you next time.